Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today, I want to talk about facts. Actual, demonstrable facts. We're losing trust and we're losing faith in them. And that's in no small part thanks to artificial intelligence muddying the water. Not to mention disinformation, in general that we've seen in the past prior to the artificial intelligence boom. But Alyssa Wilkinson of the New York Times really got me thinking about this, and she writes specifically about documentaries. Now, FYI, I love documentaries. I'm a big documentary nerd. I was a history major in college, etc., etc. This is something that I truly, truly enjoy. And documentaries, for the record, fundamentally traffic in issues of truth, transparency, and trust. So, if they use so-called synthetic materials but present them as if they're real, it's not just a betrayal of the tacit contract between filmmaker and audience. The implications of this are far broader and they're far more serious. Basically, and this is what Wilkinson argues, is that a century of shared history is in jeopardy. And yeah, I think she's right. So think about this. Essentially, whispers that documentaries were starting to use materials created with generative AI started surfacing several years ago. And again, prior to this, documentaries who don't have blockbuster Tom Cruise budgets, they're looking for ways here. But think about this way. Roadrunner, which is a 2021 film about Anthony Bourdain, basically set off a controversy when it failed to disclose that several of the lines in his voiceover had actually been generated with software trained on existing samples of his voice. In other words, you thought you were in the audience listening to Anthony Bourdain say something when in fact, no, the documentarians just made an AI sound like him and say things. That made the news, for the record. But in other productions, sometimes cloaked by non-disclosure agreements, we don't necessarily know that that's going to happen. In 2023, a group of documentary producers formed the Archival Producers Alliance and published an open letter to their industry calling for greater transparency, listing ways that generative AI had been used without disclosure. And what they pointed out was, quite frankly, depressing. Artificially created historical voices, which lead audiences, and I quote, to believe they are hearing authentic primary sources when they are not. Basically, instead of what they're hearing and seeing are AI-generated historical images, fake newspaper articles, and non-existent historical artifacts. In other words, you may have watched a documentary in the last few years or so and thought what you were seeing was real, but it may not have been. So, of course, we're all aware that what we see in a video or a movie isn't necessarily real. We all know, computer graphics going back decades at this point, camera trickery, the ability to manipulate images. But until very recently, it took a fair amount of skill, or at least time and money, to make realistic fake videos. And that is 100% true. Now, we can go to a website like Sora and just crank them out. So, you would need, back then, the resources of a Hollywood studio. And even then, it's probably going to look a little janky. We've come a long way since then. But with documentaries, there's also a social contract. We believe that what we are being shown happened, with possibly some exceptions. So reenactments have become more common in years, but filmmakers have developed a visual vocabulary for those staged scenes. They're dreamy, a little blurry, usually faceless. You immediately know what you're looking at because it doesn't look real. In other words, there's no picture of OJ actually doing it, but if there's a documentary on it, you might see basically like a blurred actor playing OJ going to town, right? So that's what we're talking about, but it's not actually OJ. It's a reenactment. So think about it this way. These conventions exist to preserve our trust in what we're viewing. If you're watching historical images of a civil rights march, for example, or even scenes from a family birthday party, you think that the producer just basically got the footage from somewhere, right? They dug it up. It's a historical record. But finding and shooting footage is expensive and it takes time. And that's exactly what today's documentarians are oftentimes not afforded, especially when they're working through those very quick rip through the headlines, this just happened kind of thing for the streaming platforms that are always looking for content. That young lady, what was she, 22, that was traveling around, Gabby Petito or something like that, I think her name was, and her boyfriend killed her when they were like living in a van as they were like driving around the various national parks. They cranked out a documentary on that like ASAP, but then it makes me wonder, like, is everything actually legit? Do they just kind of fake some things in the interest of time? I don't know. That's the problem, right? I mean, the temptation is clearly there to plug a prompt into an AI. Sometimes it's even a mandate from on high, basically due to speed or turnaround time, right? Probably. But it gets worse. Because when OpenAI, for example, demonstrated the first version of its Sora video generator in early 2024, they used, quote, historical footage from of California during the gold rush, end quote, as a demo prompt. In other words, they made a video of the California gold rush when there was no such thing as video. They took pictures, the AI extrapolated, and then Sora did its thing. But that's not real. That's not necessarily what happened. All we know is the picture in time. That's what we're talking about here. Members of basically the Archival Producers Alliance, those are producers and directors, saw exactly how damaging this trend could be, not just for documentaries, but also for the shared public record. In 2024, they announced a comprehensive set of best practices, and the guiding principle behind this is transparency and trust, as it should be. The audience basically should know when an AI tool is used. Maybe it's to enhance a damaged photo, sharpen an audio clip, create a voice from written text and recordings. But what's even more important, though, are the guidelines are concerned with protecting history itself, with not, quote, muddying the historical record, end quote. And yes, that's exactly the problem. If you didn't know video cameras or rudimentary video cameras didn't exist when Abraham Lincoln was around, and you saw a video of Abraham Lincoln that looked all old-timey and possibly sounded like him, you're going to think it's real. If enhanced or generated material is used, the Alliance suggests the disclosure should be made on screen, not saved for the credits. And I 100% agree with that statement. And the reason being here is that every film that's streamed can be basically edited, right? It can be basically chunked into segments. You can play like short clips on reels, like all that kind of stuff. So any piece then becomes part of the archive, discoverable online, divorced from the larger context of the film, making it easy for somebody to assume that clip is real. So if they did a AI video reenactment of Abraham Lincoln and for 30 seconds or whatever, and there's no understanding that this is AI and it looks incredibly real given the technology, somebody goes and watches that in a 30-second reel clip or on TikTok or wherever, and boom, now you've got people thinking that was actually Abraham Lincoln when it clearly was not. It was maybe a picture that they turned into a video. On top of this, AI also raises an even bigger issue for documentaries, and in turn for all of us as well. And this is something, for the record, I've done multiple videos and podcasts and radio segments on, and that is the liar's dividend. So think about it this way, and again, I don't like to get into politics, but it's the perfect example of this from very recent, is that basically in September, a video clip surfaced in which a black garbage bag was apparently tossed out of a window from the White House, aka where the president lives. Now, the White House press office said it was a contractor doing routine maintenance. I mean, it was no big deal. Nobody really thought, it was odd, but like nobody thought something malicious here was going on, right? But President Trump then gets involved and incorrectly declares that the clip was AI. That's the issue that we have here. Quote, one of the problem we have with AI, it's both good and bad. If something happens really bad, just blame AI. But also they create things, it works both ways, end quote. That's President Trump. Now, I'm bringing this up basically because it reinforces the framework at play here for the liar's dividend. We are becoming more aware of how easy it is to create convincingly fake videos, which means that people who claim real videos are fake are becoming more persuasive too. Elon Musk tried this in court. January 6th rioters in court tried this as well, saying, well, how do we know the jury's not seeing a video of me or the victim's not seeing a video of me, that this is just an AI generated version of this? The courts are very good at sussing these things out, but as these things improve and they continue to slam the legal system or simply be brought up as evidence outside of a court for one thing or the other, we have a problem on our hands. And so I don't think this is a good thing. This is only going to get worse, but as basically a history major, literally I have a degree in history, a fan of documentaries and a fan of knowing the truth, knowing the actual truth, even when it's painful, I'm not a fan of this. And so I think there needs to be clear and concise guidelines on this. If you're going to use artificial intelligence in a documentary, you've got to make sure that if we're listening to Anthony Bourdain, we know it's an AI rendition and not actually his words. I think that's so unbelievably important. Same with video and everything else. So I'll leave it at that. This is deeply concerning to me, and I guess best of luck to us all. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well, where you're just getting me, no AI. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, 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 and I'm going to say private, secure, and informed. Take care.